Hello everybody and welcome to Decoding the WSL, the podcast dedicated to the stats and facts in the WSL. Game week 2 has been and gone, there's been a thrashing and there's been some close games as well. As well as looking at the goals, I'm going to be giving you all the numbers you need to look back on the weekend's games. It's Monday the 30th of September and I'm your host, Sam Biccarino. Yes, here we are, listener. Another week has gone, and that means there's 6 more matches for us to review, for us to get our teeth into. Before we get too far into the episode, let's just have a quick review about how the weekend's games went. The Eagles were given the blues on Friday night as Chelsea visited Palace and thrashed them 7-0. Only 1-0 at half-time, but a second half drubbing from the league champions meant they came away with a comfortable 3 points. It was then Saturday off, and on Sunday the Citizens hosted the Seagulls. Bunny Shaw goal being the only difference between the two sides, and I'm sure it's not the only time I'm going to say that this season. The remainder of the weekend's games were all on YouTube, starting off with Everton Man Utd, a very close game with Grace Clinton's 4th minute goal, winning the game for Man Utd. Then it was Leicester versus Arsenal, another weekend for Arsenal where the men and the women were playing against the same club. It wasn't, however, another identical result this time, with Arsenal taking a 1-0 victory over Liverpool. At the same time as that, we saw West Ham host Liverpool in a match that finished 1-1. Olivia Smith opening the scoring early on and Rico Oweki equalising 5 minutes from time. And then the game that I dubbed as the closest game of the weekend and ended up being a draw. Villa 2, Spurs 2. Jordan Nobbs breaking records in the process. But we'll start at the start, going back to Selhurst Park on Friday night. 7:30pm on Sky Sports Friday night. That's where I was, listener. I don't know where you were watching the game. Maybe you're lucky enough to be in the stadium, as it was a repeat of an FA Cup game from February last year. Chelsea did win that one 1-0, which was probably a fair result, but it wasn't quite the same scoreline this time. Chelsea running away 7-0 winners. The biggest result in the WSL since Chelsea beat Bristol last season 8-0. Now, I was quite busy at the time, so had it on my phone in the corner, and the first half was quite quiet, and it was 1-0 at half-time, and I sort of thought that was about fair. Chelsea probably slightly the better team, deserved the 1-0 lead, but the second half, Chelsea really ran away with it. All in all, for the 7-0, there were 6 different scorers, Guro Reiten being the only one to score twice in the game. Mayra Ramirez became the first player in the league to reach 2 assists, also getting 3 goal-creating actions in the process, which is also the most in the league. But Chelsea really dominated the game, 70% possession compared to obviously Palace's 30%. Chelsea had 78% pass success compared to Palace's 67%. And Chelsea had 24 shots with 11 on target. Palace only had 5 with 2 on target. Even if all 5 of those shots went in, Chelsea would have still won the game by 2 goals. That is how much dominance they had. It's Chelsea's 5th WSL win to nil in a row. 5 clean sheets and 5 wins in a row in the league, obviously over 2 seasons with 2 different managers, but still the same outcome. Chelsea now have the most goals in the WSL with 8. Palace are level with Everton for 0, the fewest goals in the league, the only 2 teams yet to score still. That now means that Crystal Palace have obviously scored 0 goals, but have now conceded 11 in the league, minus 11 goal difference. Their XG difference is only minus 6.3, so 4.7 better than their actual goal difference, which shows that they are not just underperforming in front of goal, although I suppose with 0.6 XG it's not necessarily unsurprising that they haven't scored yet, but conceding 11 goals and 6.9 XG is not great for any team, no matter your quality. So that'll be something that they'll be definitely looking to improve on, something that they won't really have had to think about too much last year. With their goal scoring prowess in the league, they didn't have to worry too much about how much they conceded, but they're obviously finding it a little bit harder this season. They have had 2 hard games, Spurs away and then Chelsea at home, but so they definitely need to improve on this season, especially with Elise Hughes still out with that ACL injury. Some other fun stats on this match, or stats anyway, that I thought were interesting was, I'm going to start with one about Millie Bright. She won the most aerial duels, or has won the most aerial duels in the WSL this season. She's now up to 9, overtaking Maya Le Tissier on the way. Hannah Hampton is one of only 2 keepers that have kept clean sheets in both games, Valentus Joyce at Man Utd being the other. And that has contributed to 3 of Chelsea's players having the most on-pitch goal difference so far. So on-pitch goal difference, if you don't know, is done per player, and it's while they're on the pitch, how many goals has their team scored, minus how many have they conceded. +8 is the best in the league at the moment, and it is 3 Chelsea players. It is Millie Bright, Hannah Hampton and Guru Brighton that have that. There are obviously other Chelsea players, but not anyone that has been on the pitch for all 8 goals that Chelsea have scored, other than those 3. Chelsea have also become the first team to hit 100 progressive passes in the season, or to complete 100. 106 being the magic number, Man City just behind in the high 90s. But some bits about Palace. They've now got the most yellow cards in the league with 7, showing that they're still putting in the effort, even though they're not quite getting the outcomes in front of goal that they want. Shea Yanez is not having a good time of it. She's actually made as many saves, 16, as the next 2 keepers combined, Sophie Bagley and Lisa Kopp, both on 8. It's also worth noting that Shea Yanez has conceded 11 goals, as I mentioned earlier, whereas Bagley and Kopp between them have only conceded 3. Conceding 3 goals from 11 shots is significantly better than conceding 11 from 27 shots for Yanez, so that's going to be something that she needs to improve on as well, and to improve her post-shot XG numbers, currently at -4.1. And finally, a little stat that I found very interesting anyway in this game was about Lucy Bronze. She actually had the 4th most touches in this game at 76, which you might be thinking, well, is that important? You know, having the 4th most touches in the game, 76 touches, it's not an incredible amount, but she was subbed off at 63 minutes, so only played 2/3 of the game and still had more touches than any Crystal Palace player, as well as more touches than a number of the other players on her own team that started the game. I think that just shows how much of Chelsea's play goes down that right-hand side and how much they're putting their trust in Lucy Bronze. It's no surprise that Sonia Bonpastor was so keen to bring her to the club and then is giving her so much involvement in the games. All in all, I think Chelsea can definitely feel like they should have won the game, but surprised they scored 7 goals. I think there were some quite low XG shots. Think about that goal from Lucy Bronze from distance. Probably one that she may not have tried depending on what keeper was facing her. But Chelsea only accumulated 2.8 XG, so to score 7 is huge. You know, to be 4.2 above your goal scoring in one game shows not just that they were clinical in their shooting, but also maybe Palace weren't quite as good at stopping them as most teams would be. But all in all, a comfortable win for Chelsea and a game that they definitely deserve to win. Now, talking of games that you deserve to win, let's move straight on to the first game on Sunday, Manchester City hosting Brighton. The game only finished 1-0, but Manchester City were far, far the better side in this game. Not just on their XG that they accumulated, 3 XG compared to 0.8, but their general play throughout the game. So Man City dominated possession. They had 59% to Brighton's 41. They had 21 shots to Brighton's 6, including 8 on target versus 2. In aerial duels, Man City won 12 out of 16, so far above the 50% that you would see on average. The only difference between the teams in the game in the end was Bunny Shaw's goal. Good run from Kirsten Kasparai, putting the ball into what I was going to call the corridor of uncertainty, but when Bunny Shaw's there, there's normally some certainty she's going to get at least a shot, if not a shot on target, if not a goal, and that's exactly what happened here. First time touch, just passing it beyond Sophie Bagley. Shaw now has the most XG in the league. She's accumulated 1.8 this season. The only player alongside her that's accumulated more than 1 was actually another player on the pitch, Fran Kirby. She has accumulated 1.2. Going into the game, Brighton would have been hoping to get at least a goal because Brighton have actually scored in their last 5 games against City, as I mentioned in the preview, but obviously no longer. Naomi Lazell got a start for Man City in this game, started at right back rather than her usual centre-back role, but you could tell Gareth Taylor had a plan there because she was the only player in this game with over 100 touches, 104 in total. So she's not just there to make up the numbers, she was very much in their plans. Someone else that was back in was Yamashita. She lost her place midweek to Kiara Keating in the Champions League game, although going in with a 5-goal lead, it was probably more that Taylor's giving Keating some minutes rather than he thinks that she's better than Yamashita. Yamashita definitely looks like she's nailing down that number 1 spot at Man City. Those that have listened to the podcast before will know that I do think Keating's a very good keeper, so I'm still quite surprised that City have decided to go down that route and put someone else in, but it's paying dividends at the moment. She played well last week against Arsenal and then kept a clean sheet against Brighton. Someone else that was back in the team was Jill Roord, back in action after her ACL injury. She was one of, I think, City's best players at the start of the season last year. She got quite a few goals in not that many games, especially for a player that was playing in midfield, so they'll be glad to have her back, even though she only came on as a sub in this game. Some other stats to throw at you from this game is that Man City have now fielded the youngest team in the WSL this season. This is weighted by the minutes that they've played. Their average age has been 25.9, younger than any other team. I think Manchester United are actually second, so the two Manc teams flying the flag for youth in the league. Leia Alexandri now has the most progressive passes in the league with 22, and Alex Greenwood has become the first player to hit 200 touches on 203. Although if Naomi Lazelle had played the first game and got 104 as well, she would obviously be ahead of that. But Alex Greenwood is at the top of the moment, and I would imagine that she is a player that, unless she gets injured, will remain at the top for the rest of the season. The last player that I wanted to highlight in this game was actually Lauren Hemp, because yes, she didn't necessarily get the headline, she didn't get an assist, she didn't get a goal, but I thought she was Man City's best player and the best player in the game. Her numbers really speak for themselves, not just in her quality, but in the type of play she is. So she's now got 10 key passes in the WSL. That is double as many as anyone else. No one else has more than 5. She's had 13 completed passes into the box. No one else has more than 8. That is Kenza Dali. She's got 14 shot-creating actions. There are 3 players on 9, but that's as high as anyone else goes. No one makes double figures. And a stat that I think we all associate with Lauren Hemp is successful take-ons. She's completed 8 already, Kirsty Hansen and Lucy Parry being next closest with 6. So you can see in that sort of creativity realm, she really is leading those stats, shot creating actions, successful take-ons, passes into the box, key passes. Those are things that Lauren Hemp is great at, and Gareth Taylor is continuing to get the best out of her this season. Getting the best out of Lauren Hemp will be something that any team would love to do, but Manchester City especially will need her this season. There's going to be a bit more rotation through the squad, especially with the Champions League games this year. But after hosting West Ham next week, they do have the Champions League kicking off, and then they've got the likes of Liverpool, Aston Villa in the couple of weeks after. So we'll need to be on top form and getting Lauren Hemp into her top form as well. Next up is the games that were on YouTube, and we're going to start with the first one of those. It is the 2 p.m. kickoff on Sunday, Everton hosting Manchester United. Manchester United have now won 5 of their last 6 away games at Everton after Sunday's 1-0 win. It was Grace Clinton's 4th minute goal that got them the win. She took advantage of some poor passing out from Everton, pouncing to intercept a pass and coolly slotting away past a relatively helpless Courtney Brosnan in that situation. There wasn't really much she could do, but generally it was a very, very close game. Possession was only 48-52 in Manchester United's favour. Man United only had 1 more shot than Everton did, 9-10, and then 4-5 on target. They both had 2 corners, and they both completed between 300 to 400 passes. So a very close game. Everton, we know, are very good at keeping games to low scoring. Last season, as I mentioned in a previous pod, they had the fewest goals in their games, and there's something that they carried on. There was quite a lengthy stoppage in this game. Emma Gabaro was down injured around the 15-minute mark for quite some time. There was a lot of time added on at the end of the first half. I haven't actually seen the result of that injury, but it didn't look great. It looked like she was in a lot of pain. I think she did get up on her own at the end of it and walk off, so it's not too bad, but it's likely to be out for some time, I'm assuming, given the reaction that she had, so I wish her all the best for that. Some general stats that we now can see from this game. Everton are still yet to score a goal alongside Palace. They are the only teams that have not scored yet, but some more positive ones, mainly from the Manchester United side, you'll probably be unsurprised to hear, is that Fallon Tullis-Joyce, in her second ever WSL match and her second ever competitive match for Manchester United, keeps her second clean sheet, level with the likes of Hannah Hampton in the league. Grace Clinton, here's a stat that if you know some of the numbers about what she's good at and have seen my stuff before, you'll probably be unsurprised to hear this, but she now has the most blocks in the league with 8. She's very much famed for her attacking prowess and her carrying of the ball, but her defensive actions are something that where she really sticks out with the numbers. She's really very good it was last season is looking like she's continuing to be this season. And Mayra Ramirez is another one that I wanted to highlight because the new captain fantastic at Man United, she needs to be leading by example, and she most certainly is. She's now had the furthest progressive pass distance in the WSL, passing 1.3 kilometres in total. It is a stat that you would expect a centre-back to be leading, but you may, most likely expect it from someone like a Man City who dominates possession, or maybe even Liverpool, who we'll come to later, who have the most possession in the league. But the fact that Mayra Ramirez has this just shows how much of their play is going through her. This was, with it being such a close game, the sort of match where it would just take one moment to win it. And that's exactly what happened with that Grace Clinton interception early on and giving Courtney Brosnan absolutely no chance in saving it. The XG was relatively close, 0.7 to 1.0, so you could say that it was potentially the sort of game where Everton should have scored, but it's one of those that Manchester United got the job done at the end of the day. Everton didn't, and that's the difference between the two sides. Manchester United now near the top of the table with 2 wins, one of only 2 teams to do so alongside Chelsea, and they'll be looking to carry on that form, especially after a relatively disappointing campaign last season. Everton, on the other hand, 2 losses, no goals scored, -5 goal difference. They're only not in the relegation place due to Crystal Palace's goal difference. They are going to need something to boost them up. They're going to need something for Brian Sorensen to cheer about. And they've got some quality in that side. Yes, they've lost Aurora Galli to injury, but you would imagine they will start getting points on the board. It might not be next week at Arsenal away, but you're looking at West Ham at home after that, Leicester City away. You know, they're probably looking to pick up at least 2 or 3 points in those games. Manchester United have got a bye this week, which I'll cover off later after not playing Chelsea, but they've not got the easiest run of games after that. They're at home to Spurs, away to Brighton, at home to Arsenal, and then at home to Villa in their next 4 games. So getting a good start to the season has been fantastic for them and exactly what they need. Then we move on to Leicester 0, Arsenal 1. 3 o'clock on Sunday afternoon. It's the second weekend in a row where Arsenal's men and women have played the same team, as I mentioned earlier. Last week, it was Manchester City, with both matches finishing 2-2. After Arsenal's men beat Leicester's men 4-2 on Saturday, I think the neutral at least, if not the Arsenal fan as well, was hoping for a similar scoreline and some good entertainment, but it was just a 1-0 win. This time, Frida Marnham's goal separating the two sides. Arsenal have a very good record against Leicester. It's now 7 out of 7 in the WSL, where they have beaten the Blues, with an aggregate score of 24-2. Arsenal really have that dominance, and they really have Leicester's number. Daphne van Domselaar got her first league start for the Gunners, starting over Manuela Zinsberger, who has both played in the Champions League and the WSL so far. Van Domselaar obviously transferring over from Villa in the summer for a lot of money. It would be surprising if they didn't use her, but I thought she put in a great performance. Made some really key saves. Leicester had some really good chances. Ones where you may expect the keeper to save them, but it still needs saving. She did so brilliantly. She really is the sort of player that doesn't just have good stats behind her, but really passes the eye test as well. And I think that breeds confidence into the back line when you look behind you and you see someone playing as well as she does and doing all the right things. Some stats from the game to show Arsenal's dominance, actually. There was 65% possession for Arsenal compared to Leicester's 35%. They had much more of the ball. They made 515 passes to Leicester's 248, so over double. And the 5 players that made the most passes in the match all played for Arsenal. It was their back 4 plus Leah Volti at centre mid. After not having much possession against Liverpool in their first game, and even less against Arsenal, Leicester now have the least possession in the WSL per match on average, at just 37.5%. I don't know if that's a tactic that Mandy Mikel is trying to go for, but they certainly are developing into quite a counter-attacking side, because, well, you kind of have to be when you've only got, less than 40% of the possession in the game. CJ Bott, however, is a kind of shining light at Leicester at the moment. She is leading the league for interceptions. She has had 9, more than any other player. Arsenal have a couple of players that are doing quite well in their individual stats as well. Frida Marnham is now the second top scorer in the league with 2. Only Kiko Saika has more after that first game hat-trick. And Lotte Wibben-Moy has the most passes completed into the final third with 21, the first player to hit 20 this season. And interestingly, her centre-back partnership, Leia Cadena, is second on 17. I think when you get two players at the same club in a very similar position, the left and the right-sided centre-backs, topping a certain stat, it really shows that that is how a certain team is trying to play. So you can see that Arsenal are trusting their centre-backs to get the ball into the final third by passing it through the lines, picking out the right players in the right spaces. I think Arsenal did deserve to win this game. Leicester only accumulated 0.4 XG in total. Arsenal with 1.5. It was a game that you would expect them to win before the match, and looking at the stats after it, if you didn't know what the scoreline was, you would probably assume that Arsenal had won, probably by 1 goal. So a decent match at the King Power, and definitely a deserved win for the Gunners. The other match at 3 p.m. was West Ham hosting Liverpool. It finished 1-1, which was the exact same scoreline in the same fixture last season when West Ham hosted Liverpool. This time, though, was a player that wasn't playing last season, Olivia Smith, scoring her debut for Liverpool, opening the scoring early on. A lovely dummy to send the defender the wrong way before hitting the side netting with her left foot. Liverpool led for most of the game until Rico Orecki equalised in the 85th minute, gaining West Ham's first point of the season. Obviously, they lost 3-0 to Manchester United in the first game of the season. Liverpool, interestingly, are the only team to have drawn both their opening games, them firmly in a relatively mid-table position so far, but to go unbeaten in your first 2 games is never a bad thing. The matchup against Liverpool is something West Ham are going to want to improve on as the future comes, because they've now only won 1 of their last 9 games against Liverpool in the league. And although I've mentioned that West Ham need to improve their form, so did Liverpool, because that's the 4th game in a row that Liverpool haven't won when going away to West Ham. Both teams obviously always want to get better over time, but I think Liverpool are a team that we can all probably agree are a better team than West Ham and have improved much more in recent years. So to not be able to win away at West Ham is something they're definitely going to want to improve on next season. Stop that run of kind of average games for them that they think they should be winning. In this game, Liverpool were largely the better team. They had 58% possession to West Ham's 42. They had 12 shots to West Ham's 8, although not necessarily the best shots because both teams only had 2 on target in the end. But Liverpool completed a lot more passes, in fact 85 more passes, 278 to West Ham's 193. And something that I thought was quite interesting was the number of dribbles completed. So West Ham only attempted 5 dribbles, which isn't a lot, completing just 1, showing that A, it's not something that they're trying to do, but B, it doesn't sound like something that they're particularly adept at doing. Liverpool, however, attempted 14 dribbles, which is more than average, and completed 5, which isn't great. You probably expect, depending on the quality of the dribbler, somewhere between 45 to 60% success rate. So to only get 5 out of 14 is not great, but 5 completed dribbles to just 1 for West Ham shows that Liverpool were much more likely to attempt those dribbles, especially down that right side with Lucy Parry, who is now 2nd in the league for dribbles completed behind Lauren Hemp. Unsurprisingly, Sophie Haug won the most aerial duels in this game with 6. A stat where I might start keeping track of this, of how many games Sophie Haug wins the most aerial duels in, because I bet over a 22-game season she'll probably be the person that wins the most aerial duels in more games than anyone else. A weird quirk I saw in this game that I wasn't really expecting to see and don't really ever see is that Liverpool had 8 corners, which doesn't sound particularly strange, but they had 6 different takers for those corners. I don't know the reasoning behind it. I didn't actually catch this game, but it may have been to do with the substitutions that happened at certain times and when the corners were, but it does seem strange to have 6 different takers of corners in just 8 corners as well. You might have a couple, 1 on each side, and maybe if they get subbed off, but I thought that was a bit of a quirk and a bit interesting to bring to you tonight. In the WSL now, Liverpool, as I mentioned earlier, now have the most possession on average of 59%, not quite hitting the heights of 60 plus like some teams did last season, but I don't know about you, I'm quite surprised that Liverpool are the highest of that, because you look at Chelsea having faced Palace already, and yes, they've faced Villa as well, which is a difficult match, but it wouldn't necessarily have been a stat that I would expect Liverpool would be dominating, so that'll be nothing negative for Matt Beard to have a look at, and he'll be enjoying that his team playing in that way. Through all their possession and quite good pressing as well, that actually helped Amber Tiziak take the lead in a stat this season, which is clearances. He's now had the most clearances in the league with 18, more than any other player. I don't think any other player off the top of my head has had more than 15. So she's starting to lead the way on that, and if she continues to stay that high, it will be a bit of an indictment about the way that West Ham are playing and how much pressure they're being put under, that their centre-backs don't have the chance, probably more than anything, rather than the skill set, but probably more the chance to actually play it out and they're having to make clearances. As I said, it was quite a close game. West Ham did get 0.7 xg, so it's not overly surprising they scored. And Liverpool with 1.1 xg, again, not surprising that they scored exactly 1 goal. So 1-1 was probably fair from this game. Liverpool slightly the better team. They certainly dominated the play, but in terms of actually getting those scoring chances, 1-1 was a fair result. And on to the final game of the weekend, the 4:30 game on Sunday live on YouTube. It was Villa 2, Spurs 2. There are records broken in this game. Jordan Nobbs matching Sophie Ingall's record for 192 WSL appearances. She's also, I believe, the only player to have played in every season of the WSL. So Jordan Nobbs really, I don't have the stats on here, but probably literally going the extra mile with her career. And with Sophie Ingall's injury at the moment, you would expect that Jordan Nobbs is going to be setting probably a 200th WSL appearance before too long. In terms of how the game went, Evelina Summanen scored a penalty in the first half. Those that listened to my preview for the season, especially the fantasy preview, will know that Summanen took a penalty in pre-season. I believe when Beth England is not on the pitch, she is the number 1 penalty taker, so that wasn't too surprising to see. Adriana Leon, later on in the game for Aston Villa, was subbed on at 67th minute, and just 11 minutes later got the equaliser. 10 minutes before Rachel Daly scored to make it 2-1, and that was at a point where I think Villa probably thought that they'd got the game wrapped up 2 minutes before the 90th minute, but there was quite a lot of time added on, and Bethany England, also off the bench, managed to get a 95th minute equaliser. In fact, Bethany England now has the most goal involvements per 90 this season. Obviously, she hasn't played the full 90 minutes in both games, so that per 90 stat is looking quite good for her at the moment. She's got 2.81 goal involvements. That's her goals plus assists. Kiko Saika is the next on that stat on 1.89, so almost 1 per 90 ahead of her. She keeps that up, that almost 3 goals involvements, goals plus assists per game, would be amazing to keep that up, and that would definitely be something that would put Spurs way up the table and into those Champions League spots. But we'll see how she goes, because that is a height that I don't think anyone in the WSL's history has reached and played a decent amount of minutes. Some stats on the game are that there was 53 to 47 possessions. So in that case, in terms of how much people had the ball, it was quite even. But when we start taking a look at the shots, you can see that Villa really dominated in this aspect. But I'll get to something else in a moment. But I just want to say that Villa had 19 shots. That is loads. Spurs only had 4. Villa ended up having 6 on target. Spurs just 2. But Rachel Daly on her own had 7 shots. She had almost double the number of shots that Spurs had. And she also had 2 on target, which is the same number that Spurs had. Despite many more shots, they didn't actually accumulate that much more XG. In fact, Aston Villa accumulated 1.9 XG from their 19 shots, so roughly 0.1 XG per shot. Whereas Spurs accumulated 1.3 from their 4 shots, about 0.3 per shot. So Spurs' shots on average were about 3 times as good as Aston Villa. So although they didn't have anywhere near as many, they were having higher quality chances, which probably goes some way to show how they won this game. A couple of stats that demonstrate how Villa played this game and how much they dominated in terms of those numbers that I've already suggested, like the shots. They had 10 key passes in the game to Spurs' 1. Quite a big difference, quite a lot as well. 10 key passes in a game for a team is quite good. Villa also had 8 corners to Spurs' 1. 1 corner, obviously, not being many for a team in a game, but it was enough for Spurs as they did get that 2-2 draw. Overall in the WSL now, Spurs have fielded the oldest team. This is again weighted for minutes played per player at 28.5 years on average. Not incredibly old, there were points last year where teams were fielding teams 30 plus, so 28.5 isn't too old, but when they've lost a couple of big stars in Clinton and Bizet, replaced them with slightly older players like Rasso, although I say older, Rasso's probably about in her prime as she's in her late 20s, it is still going to up that average. Talking of Rasso, she now has the most progressive carries in the league with 14, and a very good stat for her is her carries into the penalty area. She's had 8, whereas no other player in the league has had more than 4. In fact, Johanna Retin-Kaneryd is the only player that's had 4, and there are a few players on 3 and below. Ash Neville, you will hear routinely on this podcast, I will wax lyrical about this player. She has won 11 tackles in the league this year, more than any other player, and she can boast that by winning 100% of her tackles at the same time. There aren't many players that have won more than 5 tackles at all. And I don't think there's any, there might be 1 or 2, that have won 100% of theirs. So for her to win 11 and only have attempted 11 is a really good feat. As I mentioned earlier, it was 1.9 XG to 1.3, so only 0.3 XG in it. Aston Villa probably did deserve a win if you were going to pick one team, but overall, draw is probably about fair, and that's good because I called that as the closest game of the weekend, so I'm a pretty happy buddy with that as well. Now, unfortunately, I've got a bit of a busy week this week, so I'm probably not going to be able to do a preview for game week 3, but something I did just want to highlight is that the Chelsea-Manchester United game is not being played this weekend. So, this is something you may have seen, but the Champions League draw was made this week, and Chelsea start their campaign on the 8th of October, the Tuesday, only 2 days after their scheduled game at home to Manchester United. Now, in terms of player welfare, this is something that is less than ideal because only having, just over 48 hours from the end of one game to the start of the next is not enough time for players to routinely rest themselves effectively and be ready for the next game. It's something that the Chelsea Supporters Association have spoken out about because the game has been postponed. I agree with them in that this is the correct thing to do, but also agree that this is something that didn't need to happen and didn't need to happen in this way. It seems very late that the Champions League and UEFA are making these decisions about exactly where matches are going to be. You know, the first match is less than a couple of weeks after they announced draw. And I do feel for a lot of especially the Manchester United fans that are going to Chelsea, because you'll probably have got people that not just bought their tickets, but maybe have already paid for travel. Some of them, with it being a 12 o'clock kickoff on a Sunday, going from Manchester to London, you know, they may have booked accommodation on the Saturday night. They may not be able to get some of this money back. So it's really not a good one for the fans. And I hope it's something that not necessarily the club, but both the league and the Champions League will learn from in future and plan that a little bit further ahead so this sort of thing doesn't happen again. Now, before I go, I just want to mention something that I have mentioned in previous podcasts before, but is to get voting on the Football Content Awards, because 5 of the guests that I've had on the pod so far have been nominated at the Football Content Awards for Best Creators in Women's Football. There is Connor Roberts and Laura Howard from All for Wofo, Freya Taylor-Hall from the Absolute Football Podcast, who have also been nominated in 2 other categories, and then Jamie Spanger and Finley Chung from The Halfway Line. They all do fantastic work. They all do slightly different types of content within the women's football world, but they all create great content. Head to the Football Content Awards website to log your vote. I'm not going to tell you who to vote for in particular because they're all worthy, but I would definitely recommend voting for either All for Wofo, Absolute Football Podcast, or The Halfway Line. Get your votes in for everything else on there as well, because you might as well once you're there. I don't know when the deadline is, but I believe the awards are being handed out in November, so the earlier you get in, the better, and then it's just done then, isn't it? The voting is now open, so go for it, because as I mentioned, those people that have been on the podcast, they've all been fantastic guests and they all do great work and they all deserve your vote. But that is it from me today, looking back at Game Week 2. As I said, I'm probably not going to have time to preview Game Week 3, so unfortunately, you're going to have to go into that one slightly blind, but at least it's only 5 games this time. Don't forget to get your fantasy teams ready and join the league if you haven't already. I'll put the code in the show notes. If you're enjoying the podcast, don't forget to hit like or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And if you can, please do leave a 5-star review because it does help people find the pod, especially at the moment when we're trying to grow it. You know, it's still early doors and we're trying to make people aware of the pod so that we can grow the conversation on the women's game as much as possible and get as much reach and get in the ears of as many people as possible. Don't forget you can follow me at Stattorino on Twitter or X. That's where I post most of my content. You might find me on Instagram occasionally and very occasionally on TikTok as well, or maybe even Threads. Other than that, thank you listener, have a great week and I will see you at the next one.